What's up, everybody? It's me, Greg Miller, and today's Game Over Greggy show is brought to you by Movement Watches. Kevin, hit it. I'm going to a wedding this weekend. I'm wearing my Movement watch. There, look at that's a good zoom, Kev. Good job. Let me tell you about Movement Watches, ladies and gentlemen. First off, they're a great holiday gift. Don't be silly. Movement Watches start at just $95 at a department store. You're looking at $400 to $500. Movement figured out that by getting rid of all the middlemen and selling online and getting rid of that retailer markup, they can get you the best possible price. They have classic design, quality construction, and stylized minimalism. There's over 500,000 watches sold in more than 160 countries. You can get $15 off today with free shipping and free returns by going to movementwatches.com/Greggy. This watch has a really clean design. Honestly, I get talked about all the time. At the wedding, I think the bride might leave her man and come home with me. I'm just kidding, Jen. That won't happen. Anyways, go to movementwatches.com/Greggy. That's MVMTwatches.com/Greggy. Join the movement. Like a laser. Can you make a laser come out of it, Kev? Next topic, my topic. I want to talk about failing as a fan. Interesting. Failing as a fan, ladies and gentlemen. It comes.
The fan ain't failing. No, it's not on.
The fan is failing. It's not on. Nick turned it off.
No.
No, failing as a fan of something obviously that you want, you know, or that you like. You know what I mean? Not fan, as in a fan, floor fan here. But if you have stories about oscillating fans failing you, please let me know. No, I was thinking about this the other day of like, you know, it's weird for us to have an audience and all these different things and how hard it is to communicate what happens on our side of the screen versus what's happening on theirs. And it made me think back to everything I've been a fan of and all the things. And there's a story I regret very, very much now being an adult and now understanding things.
Is it the one where you pooped in the bushes in front of the small Asian kid?
No, that was with, I pooped in front of Colin and the little boy was there too. He was like 15, but I don't regret that. No, that was great content for this. This whole channel's built on me pooping in that bush.
And the raccoons.
And the raccoons. Yes, that's a big part too.
Grandma.
No, this is funny too, because I looked at my topic list on things that I should talk about on the show eventually. And this one's there and it's a Weezer story and I was wearing my Weezer shirt today.
Yeah, boy.
Just happens. I was a huge Weezer fan back in the day. Still am, obviously. But since 94 along for the ride with the Blue Album, right? And when I got the Blue Album on the back, it had a thing about joining the Weezer Fan Club. And I wrote in, join the Weezer Fan Club, right? And you get a little laminated card, which I got rid of years and years and years ago, and I regret to this day that I did. But then the best thing was you got this thing called the Weezer Zine, when zines were still a thing, right?
Oh my God, yeah.
And it was, it came out, I want to say quarterly or whatever, and it had fan letters in there and art from the fans, and then like, you know, photos of like Pat Wilson or whatever at a birthday party, and like little updates about what's happening with Weezer and stuff. But it was mainly fan stuff. And then, of course, like, you know, there was such a drought between like Weezer albums and stuff. You know, Pinkerton happens and then it's just off the rails of like, is there ever going to be anything else along the lines? But even the lead up to Pinkerton, I remember being hard, that there wasn't as much stuff as you wanted. And this before the internet was really all over the place. It was hard to keep up. They were, you know, the rentals had come along too. They were getting, I'm getting off track. I remember at one point, and I forget how, it's 94. So right, I'm 11 then. Sure. And we'll say I'm between 11 and 13 when this happens or whatever. But I'm getting the Weezer zines. I like them all much. And I remember drawing some, I was drawing comics, as you know, we've talked about my stuff here.
Froggy.
My hustle, yeah, the Froggy comics or whatever. And I had a character in there. And again, in one of these things, maybe it was just doodles, but you know, Weezer Man, something totally lame. But
Weezer
like,
Man, yeah.
Exactly.
Weezer Man and Froggy.
Weezer Man and Froggy out there having adventures. Yeah, exactly. But I drew an image of Weezer Man and sent it in to the Weezer Fan Club. And I sent like a super passive aggressive note of just like, hey, submitting this, and this is like paraphrasing obviously, would love to see it in the magazine, and I think I deserve it because I've been a Weezer fan for a long time now, and it's been hard because there's no new music and what's happening, and really like a whole like, hey, like I'm owed this. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm fucking owed this.
You stand them.
Huh?
Stand. You're
yeah, exactly. No, I didn't threaten to like murder people or whatever. But I was like, you know, in my head, I'm writing into Geffen Records, some, you know, whatever, interns getting this, seeing it, putting together this Weezer magazine. Why wouldn't they just put this in there or whatever? Maybe I had done it multiple times and this was like my final straw thing. I don't recall anymore, but I remember this very specific one.
That sounds very possible.
Exactly, right? And so, because I'm a dumb kid, obviously, you don't know how the world works and you send it in, you think all this stuff.
Psychopath.
And it wouldn't be till, to not bury the lead here. I think I'm writing into a corporation, all these things. Somebody at Weezer's this huge band, right? Like clearly they have hundreds of people working on these staffs or whatever. When in reality, the Weezer fan club was run by two sisters, Michael and Carly, who like signed off all of their, they had letters in the beginning of the zine, like what's happening in the zine. They
Her name was Michael?
Yeah, Michael and Carly. They spelled Mykel. Yeah.
Never heard
but they signed off "Hear You Me" or whatever and put it out and done this whole thing. And it didn't dawn on me at the time that it wasn't a corporation running this. It was these two women that were fans of Weezer that had befriended them, and it turned out, dozens of other local LA bands that they would help whenever they came through stuff, like when they were little, not before their huge things or whatever. And that this was a passion project for them, and that when I got my fan club that looked like it was written in Sharpie, it was written in Sharpie by these people. And when I got my, packet that was written in Sharpie on it, it was written by one of these two sisters who was stuffing envelopes and sending the shit out and doing all these different things, right? And like, it was just two women who were doing all this, and I don't find out about this until they die. And they die driving to the next Weezer show. And it's still murky as to what exactly happened, but the theory commonly held is that they finished one of their Weezer shows, were driving to the next one, and fell asleep at the wheel and crashed the car and died.
That's unfortunate.
And so when that happens, then I remember this is the first time I remember Weezer had been quiet forever. It felt like, again, I'm a kid, so I don't have any sense of time or whatever. But I remember when MTV News reported on it and showed like a clip from like the benefit concert or whatever, and like Rivers had like really long hair, and I was like, that's not what I thought he looked like. I haven't seen him in so long or whatever. And then they explained like that how this all happened, and so like it's this weird regret I have, especially now knowing for us, like there's 5 of us, right? And so like when people are like, why doesn't this work and why doesn't that happen? It's like we're trying as hard as we can, and this is not trying to guilt anybody out there. All your criticisms are well warranted, and we understand them in 2017. Yeah. But like for me, that's that weird thing of being on both sides of it now. But even back then, having said that and imagining them opening this thing with this fucking stupid ass drawing, and then this letter from this 12-year-old, this petulant child, being like blah 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 blah, and I'm sure they weren't. I'm sure they're like, this kid's dumb, whatever. Move on to the hundreds of other letters and poems and art and things like praising this band and thanking us for our work. But I never thanked them, and I never had the chance to because I didn't understand the situation or how the world works at the time. And that fucking sucks. So like that's me failing as a fan. That's a fan regret I have. You know what I mean? And the fact of not taking the time to understand and thank them for what they did, and instead coming off like this douche that, again, I'm sure they lost no sleep over, that they did not worry about. It wasn't like, oh, we're not going to do it. But I've had those days here, right, where it's been a motherfucker. God, this day's been bad. I always talk about like, it's like I've fallen out of a tree and I'm hitting my head on every branch. Everything that could go wrong, and you're just bouncing around. You can't even answer these emails, and you get to the bottom. It's like, all right, fine. I'm going to go home, open up Twitter, and wow, this is broken. Why are you guys so stupid? Why didn't you hire somebody? All right. You know what I mean? It's like, well, I want to fucking scream and cry all at once now. Yeah. And so I've done that to somebody and have no way to be like, I am sorry for it. It sucks.
Yeah.
I think, in regards to that, though, I'm sure those sisters probably had a lot of good stuff coming through as well.
100%. No, they were beloved. I know that.
But despite that, I feel like there's no amount of good that can combat the bad at that moment.
Right.
And it's like the moment you get past that moment and you realize all the good, everything goes away. But there's just something about, you can get 100 compliments, but that one insult is the one that you go, what, motherfucker? You know what I mean? Yeah. And that what motherfucker response is more visceral than anything else.
Sure.
And I don't know, it's harder to take compliments, I guess, is the...
I don't know. See, I don't think I've ever been in that position where I've cared enough to like to render that sort of a criticism against something. And I think that's, when you talk about failure as a fan, I think that is my biggest failure, is that I'm not that big of a fan of anything. And it sucks.
Joe Rogan?
I do love Joe Rogan, but I mean, it's hard to knock Joe Rogan. I mean, well, it's easy to knock Joe Rogan depending on what you like to listen to or not. But he's unabashedly who he is, and so if you don't like what he puts out or that podcast,
you're not consuming it.
You're not coming back for a second listen. But I don't. I look at all the support we get from the people that consume our content and help us out over the years, and I just feel like I don't have something like that I'm passionate about. So I think that's my failure as both a creator and as a fan, is that I'm not able to throw myself wholeheartedly into something like that. Like you say that's bad, but I bet I can paint another picture.
I say what's bad?
You say the letter that you wrote.
Oh,
was bad.
Yeah.
I can paint another picture of those two sisters reading it. Clearly it's a kid's letter and they're getting a huge kick out of how much this kid cares about Weezer, right? Sure. And like they look at it like, wow, this kid's got some balls on him.
I think of it though when I get a letter like that on a bad day. And I'm not like, ha ha ha. I'm like, rage.
Yeah, it's the idea of
kick them, and I'm like, oh,
feeling
like
when
you jumped off the couch.
Yeah, it's that feeling of like that you deserve something for being a fan of somebody, and I think that's the hard thing to grapple with. Sure. And like I do have that. Like obviously Q&5, Tone Deaf, all that stuff. I've been such a fan of them from the beginning to an extent that I feel like it is partly mine. It's not. It's what I need to remember. It's not. Like it's a part of me and I'm a huge part of it. And it's definitely like there's a relationship there, but at the end of the day, it's not my thing. So it's like they can make their decisions and I can agree or disagree with them. But I feel like there's like a level of respect you need to show. It's fine to be critical, but it's the way that you kind of give that message to somebody. Because tell them, hey, you're doing this wrong. You should be doing this, even though you clearly think that. Not the best way to handle it necessarily. And I think that there's so much that goes on that you don't know. You only get one side of it. I think for me, a perfect example of this is Eminem. Huge fan of Eminem. And I think it gets hard because when you're a fan of something, you are the most critical of it because you like it that much.
You're protective of it.
Eminem, one of my favorite rappers, one of my favorite artists of all time. I can tell you so many facts about details of songs and like lines and everything. And when you get from his first album, second album, third album, we can have a multi-hour long discussion about why I like this aspect more than that aspect of these albums or whatever. Then you start going on past that and it starts to be like, oh, well, it's not as good as the first three. And it's like, then it just starts to become this like kind of negative conversation. Even if I enjoyed things about them, you're talking about the negatives or this isn't as good as that. And I've never spoke to Eminem, so I've never had to deal with that. But I have thought about this of if I were to talk to Eminem, what would I talk to him about? And I feel like the thing I'd want to talk about is, hey, what happened? Or why did you do Relapse? Why did you do that album? Like what what went through your head that was like, I'm going to use an accent for the entire thing? And it's like, instead of focusing on all the good, I immediately jumped to like all the things I didn't like about somebody that I love. And that's a problem. And I had that moment with Bernie Burns at Rooster Teeth. Red versus Blue, such an important thing in my development, in my career, my life. And the first time I was hanging out with him, or one of the first times I was hanging out with him, like we were really talking about stuff. And I found myself like one of the first things I started doing was being like, man, like the CG stuff's really good once you started going there. Why are you still like doing the same like stupid dick jokes and stuff? Like we want the story. Like it feels like such a waste. And then it wasn't until I went home afterwards, I'm like, man, he took that really well, but I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Like I should have just, and it's not just about focusing on the good. It's just don't focus on the bad. You can bring up the bad. You can say things like, oh man, I loved season 9 because this and this. Didn't totally like this because of this reason, but whatever. But instead, it inevitably turns into this thing of you almost are trying to prove to the person that you look up to that you know their work so well. And it's like, well, obviously they know I like them. So I'm going to point out all the things that I noticed that no one else noticed. You know?
And that's the big thing, I think, with even me, I've told that, the story about hate online and trying to be better online in terms of giving out positive feedback rather than negative, and how like when I was going to tweet at The Office how bad it was, and like include actors and shit, and it was like, man, people do that to me, and I know that they follow me, I know they're fans, but it's the same thing with Yelp, what I always talk about, right? Where it's like, I noticed one day all my Yelp reviews were negative because I'm not motivated when I have a good experience to go say, man, what a great experience this was. It's when somebody pisses me off that I want to go tell them. And usually it's somewhere if it's on Twitter or something, I have 140 characters to tell this creator or talk about this creation. And I just want to get through my most salient thought. And my most salient thought is this boss battle sucks. this episode's no good. Why is this? And I'm not saying that I love it. I'm letting you try to read between the lines, and most people would get that. But when you don't have the full context, it just does come off as people being dicks to be dicks.
Yeah, and the being a dick thing, it's hard to not do because you feel this sense of entitlement over things that you enjoy, especially if you pay for, and especially like all that stuff. I remember one of the very first Tone Deaf concerts I ever went to. It was me, and there was like a group of people that I didn't personally know, but I knew from the internet because we were friends in this community. And we were at the show, and Tone was at the merch table selling shirts. And I went up and I saw him, and he looked at me, and he saw my face, and he's like, "Oh, you're the dude in the yellow shirt on your profile picture." And I was like, "Oh shit, yeah!" And it was like a great moment where I was like, "Holy shit, he knows who I am."
He's like, "I hate yellow shirts."
You know, he's like, "This is great." It was such a moment for me. And then the guy behind me went up to him and he was like, "Oh, hey, do you recognize me? Like, I'm the guy and like he started talking about his profile picture, and you could see Tone kind of like struggled with it and was just like he just didn't know who this guy was, and the dude got kind of like upset. He was like, "Oh man, like damn, you know." And I forgot what he said. It wasn't even bad. It wasn't bad, but it was enough that I was just like, ooh. Like,
it's enough to take the wins out of the sails, because as a creator and like as a personality, like I feel bad when I'm like, it happens to me all the time at a meet and greet. I'll shake your hand, and I'm usually really good with faces, but I've seen so many faces now that I'll shake your hand and be like, "Great to meet you." I'm like, "Oh, well, actually we met at a Comic-Con like 4 years ago."
Yeah.
And I'll go, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." And 9 times out of 10, it's, "Oh, don't worry about it. No, you meet too many people. I get it, but I still feel awful."
Exactly.
I want to remember everyone. I want to have a conversation with everybody. I look over at the Kind of Funny game somebody made. I want to remember who made that, and I can't.
Yeah, and that's my thing. Is like, for me, it's happened where I'm like, "Oh, I've seen you. It was at PAX East." He's like, "RTX." I'm like, "Sorry, but I'm trying here."
Yeah.
But with this Tone Deaf situation, I remember it very vividly because I remember thinking, I was like, "Man, that guy like really like didn't handle that well."
Yeah.
You know, like why did he do that? But I remember going home and thinking like, well, what if it was the other way around? Like, what if this guy was in front of me and he had recognized him and not me? Like, I definitely would have felt entitled. Like, you should know who the fuck I am. And I remember thinking like, how would I have handled that? And it probably wouldn't have been too much different. I totally could have been the guy being like, well, I'm also that guy. And it's just like, I think that is the part that's hard to struggle with, this being a bad fan, because when you are such a fan, I think by default, you need to then actively try to not be bad. In terms of what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's a line or a distinction that needs to be made between critical feedback and negative feedback, right? And this is always something I say, like whenever I jump in comments on things and people have critical feedback for me, I thank them for that, because I'm like, I really do appreciate that you love this thing so much that we're doing that you want, you have a couple pieces of feedback that you'd like to see happen. That to me is super positive. And I think it really is just all how you frame it with people and how you frame it with creators that you love, because you do love this stuff, right? And there is an aspect of it that is very intimate, especially when you're talking about a product like a podcast, where people spend hours. Like, I spend hours and hours and hours listening to certain people that do podcasts. Like, I know more about Joe Rogan than I probably do about my wife, and I pry a lot into my wife. Like, I kind of like stalk her a little bit. I'm getting off on a tangent, but the point is, like, so when you like something that much and you want to give that feedback, it then becomes, how do you do it, right? How do you do it without sounding like that kid that was in line, right? Who's serious, who's hurt? And I think to the credit of a lot of people that support us, again, 9 out of 10 times, it's, hey, I really like this. Like, I see it all the time with the animated show where people go, hey, I love this. I don't, whether or not you care if it's on time or whenever it dropped, great. I would love it if this were longer. Right. And that's a positive thing for me to hear, because I'm like, great, you like this so much, you want more of it. That's cool. I wish I could make it longer. We can't. Economics, can't get into that in the comments. But so I like that. And I always respect that, because it is a two-way street, right? You don't want people to just love you unconditionally, right? Because then you can't grow as an artist. You can't grow as a creator. You need that feedback. We have to have each other. This is how this relationship works. And so to that degree, like, I kind of disagree with you a little bit in that I feel like people who do consume the content do have a level of ownership over it. Now, granted, they're not here working on it every day, but it is because of them that it is a two-way street in that regard, right? One can't exist without the other. So there is an importance to be placed on that, but you do have to stay positive all the time. You have to be able to render both criticisms and praise in a positive light if you want to exist in that environment yourself. That's all I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Made sense to me.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.